Yes, I'm Jim Latham. I'm now Senior Specialist Officer for Nature Networks at Natural Resources Wales, so charged with taking a sort of strategic lead on many of the issues around nature networks. Um, just a quick overview of what I'm going to cover. I'm going to say a bit about the background to nature networks. It's a term that a lot of people have heard, but perhaps not entirely sure what it is. I'll cover a bit about the ecological basis for it, then as a funding scheme, and then some of the wider policy connections associated with it. And then I'm going to particularly talk about the nature network map and the development of that, and cover some of the outputs from the first stage of that. And then I hope that'll then perhaps lead on to some discussion and links to designated landscapes. I should say that I had a very useful meeting with Emma and Tom a few weeks ago, and we covered a lot of this ground then. So we're sort of already making the connections there. So nature networks is primarily around nature recovery, and the basis are protected sites, as primarily things like SSIs, SACs, the sort of statutorily designated sites for biodiversity, which are fundamental mechanisms of biodiversity protection and recovery. However, it's a big but about it, the features of our sites are often not in the condition we'd want them to be in. And sites are impacted by this much wider effects of habitat loss and fragmentation, such that sites are often very small and they're almost like islands in the landscape. So nature networks, the kind of philosophy of around it, it's about addressing these issues in a combined way so that we improve the functional connection between sites so they become, the new terminology, resilient ecological networks with the sites themselves as the core of that. And nature networks as a program is a funding scheme and also a policy approach to advocate that sort of that wider approach. Just to illustrate what I'm talking about, a little infographic I've been sort of, putting around a bit recently. This is a hypothetical landscape that's supposed to represent protected sites in a landscape, outlined in red to signify they're not in good condition. So that's the sort of current islands in the landscape view. We want to move from that to something like this, where the sites are in better condition, and we start to recognize the elements in the landscape that provide connectivity, some of the linear features like watercourses, hedgerows, stepping stones in the landscape, and also recognizing where the landscape is permeable to species movement because of some mosaics of semi-natural habitats, and we can map these out and identify where the connections are. Then we want to be able to use this information then to target future action to enhance this connectivity and build up these really functional networks. So as illustrated in this slide here, things like habitat restoration, habitat creation, habitat management could be targeted better within the landscape to enhance these networks. So the Nature Networks program, to give you a bit of a background to it, it's something which has been sort of bubbling up, I think, for many years now. There's been a desire to get a longer term program of larger funding, really to sort out the condition of our protected sites and their features. And this has come to fruition through this Welsh Government programme, which is a 3-year programme currently running to 2025, which has around £45 million associated with it. So it's quite a big chunk of funding. And this funding is delivered in two ways. A portion of it goes direct into NRW, which is used to enhance our work on and around protected sites, bringing features into better condition. And it's also enabled us to bring in additional staff as well to make it happen. We've often had the problem in the past where you get a big chunk of money, but you don't have the capacity to actually spend it properly. But we've now got additional staffing in to really make the most of that internally. The other big chunk of money goes into the National Lottery Heritage Fund, who administer the grants around this broader projects, if you like, developing these nature connections, but also with a strong social element to it as well. So building in communities and the whole of that wider aspect of it. We're currently in round 3, and there's applications windows open at the moment, and there's around £9 million available for applications, with a closing date, I think, the 23rd of November, so it's quite tight. We're hoping to get a good range of applications coming in from that. As I said, that's the funding side, but Nature Networks has this broader approach as well, seeking to influence and inform other initiatives This just listing here things like the National Peatland Action Programme, things like woodland creation should be influenced by this kind of work, and sustainable farming scheme, which we've had a lot of talk about already. We're hoping that there'll be that sort of influence in terms of prioritisation, and coming sort of to the point really, a delivery of 30 by 30 and informing how that develops. So to say a bit more about that, you'll be aware of this, but just to recap, the deep dive included a recommendation to transform Wales' protected sites portfolio. So essentially what I've been saying about developing these nature networks, connecting sites, making them better condition than the rest of it as a sort of fundamental thing we need to do. And associated with that are two specific actions. One is to expand and scale up the Nature Networks program, which is interesting because there's not an additional resource associated with it. So the expectation is this is done more through advocacy of the ideas, partnership working, getting the ideas and philosophy, if you like, of nature networks out there much more and engaging with partners to help deliver some of this stuff. The second specific action, which is more tangible, is developing a nature networks map to outline and identify key focus areas. So that's been the sort of emphasis of my work really of late, working closely with Welsh Government to develop this nature networks map. And this slide just gives you an overview of the process. As I say, it's been drawn up with Welsh Government, but also in association with the Deep Dive Core Group, who've had a strong steer on it. The development works around two stages. The first one, which should be highlighted there, was delivered this last summer, and this was to make available information we currently had on essentially connectivity in the landscape in a form that people could use to inform project development. So it's aimed particularly at the lottery funded projects that are coming in to get people to use these maps to help inform where their target action to build up their projects, but also any other partners who are doing similar work. And a key caveat really is this information is descriptive. It's showing you what's there at the moment. It's not prescriptive. It's not saying you must do something in a particular location. The information is there to inform. The stuff that's included are stuff around sites, buffers around sites, modelled habitat networks for all whales, and PENs, which is this new term coming online, priority ecological networks. I'll say a bit more about those in a minute, but just to cover the rest of the development of the map first. So stage two, we're currently planning and scoping. The work will continue into, well, the next 18 months or so initially. And this is wider development to identify these key focus areas, but also to support a range of different policies in their deliveries as well. So just to describe what's in there, we want to include additional information in the mapping and refine some of these networks we've identified already. So it's bringing in things like OECMs when we've decided what they are. We need to bring those in too, and look at potential opportunity for habitat restoration and bring that in, and really importantly, existing action as well to see where that is. And we've never really brought all that together in one place to see how that relates to the aspirations, if you like, through things like network mapping to identify really where we want to target action. Another really important thing here is engagement with stakeholders and partners. We're developing new mapping, but also, we need to be aware that there's an awful lot of mapping already going on through things like area statements, obviously designated landscapes. And we want to make sure what we're doing is complementary to that and actually adds value rather than being something that is, in any way interfering with it. So, clearly want to work very closely with people developing other mapping systems. There's a whole range of other strategic mapping going on, and just one thing to highlight is dark skies mapping, which I think is particularly interesting because we're becoming increasingly aware of the impacts of light pollution on biodiversity. And there's great opportunities, I think, here to start to link some of this mapping together. So our key priorities in terms of networks and things should reflect and take into account dark skies as well, and that sort of side of impacts. We need to provide strategic guidance for 30 by 30. That's a clear sort of emphasis for it. Informing national strategic priorities. SFS is a key one coming out again. And looking ahead to future development, we need to look at updating our land cover data and the base information that goes into this sort of mapping, and also looking at things like climate change scenarios and really building those in properly, really properly planning for the future. So I'm going to now quickly give you a spin through some of the information that's in the stage 1 of the mapping. And the big chunk of it is this, what I'm calling here, modelled all whales habitat networks, which many of you will have seen before. They've been around a long time, and I know, Howard, you'll have seen me present on this a long time ago. It's the same information, but it has, in a way, a bit of a new lease of life through nature networks. I'm not going to go into the details of how the mapping works, but just as an example here on screen is a piece of Wales showing or highlighting native woodland in the dark green as the sort of traditional islands in the landscape, if you like. The modelling puts on essentially a kind of buffer around it, highlighting areas which are more likely to be better connected than others. That's essentially what it's doing. But it's quite simple, but it enables you to start to see which patches of the landscape are likely to be better connected. And from that, you can start to identify areas where you'd want to target interventions to improve that connectivity. It's a big resource. It covers a range of habitats listed there on the left, basically all our major habitat groups, terrestrial habitat groups, for all of Wales in quite fine detail. So it's a big resource of information. The other important output which we've provided are these priority ecological networks, or PENs, which are becoming quite, a lot of people are hearing of these now. What they are, in essence, are areas around and between protected sites that provide connectivity. And they're derived from the mapping I've just been showing, the sort of all Wales mapping, but it's pared it down to those key networks that are supporting the protected site series. So they give you a framework that to hang action around to enhance that connectivity between sites and also build it out further. It's a starting point essentially for developing that nature network approach. So there's an example shown there on screen. This is for semi-natural grasslands. All these maps were redone in the last year. Some of them we had draft versions which have been around for quite a long time, but we've updated all, done quite a lot of new work on them now to bring them up and get them as clean as we can. The one that's perhaps missing important is fresh water, and we're working on that at the moment to develop an equivalent mapping for fresh water too. So that's an example for grassland. The next slide shows all the ones we got all put together in one place, which is quite interesting and illustrates an important thing here, that these PENs are not they can overlap. They're not completely independent, and you get some areas of land which will contain a number of PENs for a range of different habitats. It's not a conflict. It's just showing that area of land is really important for a wide range of biodiversity. So I've been looking at these maps for some time, trying to make some sort of sense of them. And what I hadn't done previously to preparing for this meeting was to look at how the designated landscape boundaries relate to them, which I think is quite interesting. So they was putting on national parks and AONBs. Now, quite clearly, these designated landscapes contain a lot of PENs. You look at Eryri, it's essentially all a PEN for something or other, which I think is, an interesting message. Banau Brycheiniog, similarly. The AONBs around the coast and Pembrokeshire Coast National Park is interesting because very often you get that narrow but really important band of connectivity around the coast, and we're sort of picking them out in these designated landscapes. So to my mind, it's in terms of the broader 30 by 30 picture, I think there's a really interesting message coming out here that the designated landscapes have, not only are they rich in the protected sites themselves, but they're really important for this connective function and this broader function for biodiversity. So, I mean, I think there's some perhaps interesting discussion to be had around that and how that is perhaps informs or as a driver for how we see actions on the designated landscapes in times ahead. So that's a quick spin through. This is the last slide. This is just, I won't read through it, but it's just showing you where you can access the mapping. If we circulate the slides afterwards, you'll have access to the links for that. So I'm going to end there.
Diolch yn fawr.